Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we're taking a look at battles in Total War Saga Troy for the first time. I've got a couple of videos coming out today. This one showcases 2 battles, ending with my overall impressions from my time playing the battles, my time investigating all the details, and my time chatting with the developers. Timestamps are in the description below, so you can skip around as you wish, and you'll also find a link to my second video down there as well, an overview of the major features that we know about so far in both battle and campaign gameplay. I'll link to that in the pinned comment too, and it'll be under the eye at the top right corner of the screen as well. Anyway, enough time wasted with an introduction, let's get into this like a wooden horse into a city. Alright, so the first of the 2 battles I'm showcasing today is the easier of the 2, but we're still playing it on hard difficulty, and Hector is leading the Trojan defenders against Achilles and his Phthian attackers. Now, it's a somewhat simple battle, and I won it several times, but I wanted to showcase this version of it in particular because I felt like it really highlights some of what makes the game a little special. You'll notice, for example, I've got all of my archers deployed on that far right side, for the most part successfully hidden in the tall grass, and all of my melee units are going to be deployed on the far left side. That's because I want to try and draw all the melee to happen on the left, and I want the enemy to expose their backs to my archers on the right. In Total War Saga Troy, shield block chances can go as high as 85%, so you really don't want to waste your arrows firing into the fronts of those units where their shields are going to protect them. So yeah, you can see the deployment going on over here on the left side with my melee. I'm actually going to go all the way to the far left with Hector's Chosen, hide them in the trees, because they are efficient flanking attackers, which means they do extra morale damage when they charge into the sides or backs of the enemy, so hoping to use that to my advantage as well. Taking a quick scan of the enemy formation, you can see some of their javelins, and my heavily shielded units are ready to receive those javelins, while on the right side I have to move my spears to hold up against the enemy cavalry and chariots. So these are of course spears, they are anti-large, lightly armored troops, but they need to hold that right flank with the assistance of my archers as well. You can see some adjustments being done to my lines, but for the most part just bracing myself for impact on that right side and contemplating the use of my archers as well, though hesitating for now. I don't want to reveal that hand just quite yet. But you can see right off the bat over here a headlong charge into the spears using enemy cavalry. It wouldn't be a Total War game if that didn't happen, but you'll notice the cavalry actually did not take that much damage, so that's a little bit of a concern for me. So as I prepare some flanking maneuvers over here, you'll notice the chariots come through on that right flank as well, and I start to get really worried as my spears take a lot of damage. So I send in some reinforcements, the Minotaur, some more spears, and these renowned swordsmen actually turn around for a rear charge into the Aeginian runners. The Aeginian runners are a unique unit that only Achilles has access to. They're extremely fast, so I want to try and shut them down as soon as possible so they're not free to run around the battlefield and get flanking maneuvers of their own off. Sending the Minotaur in as well, he's got a Savage Roar ability, so he will be able to use that to cause morale damage in a radius around him, hoping to do that to break this right flank as quickly as possible to free up some of my units and maybe swivel around. So you can see him diving on through to try and cause some damage, and of course Hector is following relatively closely behind. Now, sending my archers in to reveal themselves from the tall grass and fire into the sides of the Myrmidon swordsmen. Myrmidon swordsmen are unbreakable, extremely capable in melee, and they have 65% block chances with their shields. Hector, meanwhile, has run through and is using one of his abilities to heal the units on that right flank. Abilities in this game come in the form of rage abilities. You gain rage in a variety of ways, by being in battle, by engaging in melee, whatever it might be, and then you use that rage to basically pop abilities. Meanwhile, over here, my archers are finally firing away at some of the Myrmidon swordsmen, again into their backs, so we're going to avoid that 65% missile block chance, and we should be doing a fair bit of damage. You can see some of my units are not having a wonderful time. You can also see I popped the Savage Roar ability to try and scare off some of the enemy units in this massive clump on the right, doing so quite effectively, I would say. And on this left side, my aggression continues. As you can see, my units are finally in place, so sending them in for some charges and counter charges, and trying to really loop through the trees and shut the enemy down as well as possible. Hector's Chosen also being brought in now, revealing them from their hiding spot. Again, they're efficient flankers, so that means If I can get them to charge into the sides or backs of the enemies, we'll do a lot of work. So just pushing them forward so we can try and get some of that flanking happening. Now you can see we're looking for the ideal targets. The Myrmidon Swordsman still very much alive, but we're going to let loose on them and take a look at their health as all these arrows come through. Again, they're very threatening in melee, unbreakable, but their shields are pointing the wrong way right now. We're firing into their backs, and they are just melting away. And you'll see how quickly they wither away. And again, it's because we're firing with our archers into their backs. They don't have that protection of their shields, and the collateral damage is doing some damage as well. So any arrows that miss are hurting units that are in the area. Apart from that, on this left side, continuing our flanking maneuvers, trying to get Hector's Chosen as far back and around as possible, because we want them to, take advantage of their unique traits, obviously. And you can see the Myrmidon Swordsmen are basically completely taken care of already. It was just a matter of seconds. And so now I consider sending those archers in against some other potential targets. Off in the distance, I catch these champions of Phthia. They are also unbreakable, also very capable in melee, so they're my next target. I want to try and fire into their backs to try and get them to melt away as well. Finally, ready for some rear charges over here. Hector's Chosen, again, efficient flankers. So when they come through out of those trees and get the rear charges, you'll see those white bars on those enemy icons drop very quickly. That's the morale indicator. It's going to drop very quickly, and you'll see the running man icon at that top left corner, which reveals the fact that we've broken a lot of enemy units. That's that efficient flanking really coming into action. Meanwhile, over here, we have Hector and Achilles duking it out in a duel. I can order Hector away, typically, though Achilles has his ability popped on Hector, which is forcing him into a locked duel for now, but you can see Achilles is very badly hurt, and Hector is actually a lot better in melee against Achilles than vice versa. Back on the left side, we've got Hector's Chosen getting a rear charge into the Aeginian runners. These guys are going to give up very quickly. They were already low on morale. Again, Hector's Chosen, can't stress it enough, effective flankers. So very, very quickly, that left side is going to start melting away, and you can see our archers are starting to run out of ammunition for the most part, while over here we come through and murder Achilles. Evidently, it's not just his heel that's weak. That's another little truth behind the myth moment for you, I suppose. So yeah, Achilles has fallen. Hector is the victor. That is going to cause some trouble for the enemy because, again, Achilles was a general. His loss means a drop in morale, and you can see enemy units across the board are now either routing or completely shattered. Now here I send my archers in for some rear charges, and even though archers aren't, melee fighters, a rear charge is a rear charge. Morale still works like it used to in old Total War games as well, so we are causing morale damage with rear charges. It's just that when an efficient flanker does a rear charge or what have you, it causes more morale damage, hence the distinction there. Now you can see sending Hector into that left side to try and get some support over there. Again, want to use his rage abilities at the bottom left corner, using that healing ability especially to try and keep some of those units alive there, and just waiting for it to cool down. There's the heal ability, works in a radius. I pop it on myself, try and keep those guys alive for as long as possible because a battle of attrition is about to be upon us. The Minotaur sees a little bit of indecision there, not sure where I want to send him. He's best used against units that will take morale damage as well as regular damage, and at the same time pulling back all of these units of mine that are chasing after pointless targets that are routing or shattered. And in comes the Minotaur with a beautiful charge, just bowling over a bunch of enemy troops. He has an ability that allows you to increase his mass even further, but completely unnecessary as he comes through and just finishes things off with a swoop of his axe as well. So much power in that Minotaur. Great to see. But he's unfortunately in a position where his Savage Roar is kind of useless. These are all unbreakable troops around him, so the morale damage isn't going to do anything. So I pull him back, take a risk to throw him in against some spears. They're very low on morale, and we have a rear charge coming as well. So I'm hoping that it'll work out in my favor. I contemplate using Savage Roar again, but again, that rear charge is coming through, so I figure I'll save the Savage Roar for some time in the future. Now Hector continues to use his abilities however possible. We've got some returning troops of Achilles causing us some trouble and concern because, again, like I said, it's going to be a battle of attrition ultimately when it's our units against his unbreakable units. Hector, meanwhile, about to use, I think, a special ability in a moment's time as he dives into melee over there. Perhaps not, perhaps in a bit. While here you can see some of the returning troops, the Thessalians over here, they are susceptible to morale damage, so in just a moment's time I get these champions of Troy to set up a flanking maneuver to try and get a rear charge on them and try to break them. and win that right flank once and for all. Savage Roar, still kind of useless, nothing really to do there. But over here you can see, again with Hector, now we use his Aristia ability. That's available to all heroes. Aristia is a reference to epic Greek poetry. It's a moment where a hero has a particularly impressive or heroic moment. So it's a one-time use ability, gives you some buffs for about 60 seconds if I'm not mistaken. And that's what we're using right now to try and survive this situation where it's a lot of our pretty badly hurt troops against a lot of unbreakable enemy soldiers. And now again, we arrive over here with the Minotaur. We pop the Savage Roar to ultimately get rid of at least one of the units there. You can see the immediate shatter. So now we can surround these spear-fighting Myrmidons who are also unbreakable, just trying to take care of them as quickly as possible. And so it basically all starts to boil down to this, where it's all of our units with varying degrees of health trying to take out a bunch of unbreakable enemy units. You can see these Myrmidon swordsmen still at basically full health, about to charge in with a rear charge into our troops. That becomes a very serious concern for me because, again, they're unbreakable. And those of you that follow this channel know my opinion and my feelings with unbreakable troops, so I try to use our healing ability as much as possible to keep our troops alive, to keep them fighting. I need to dive in with Hector as quickly as possible so we can use his, exceptional heroic capabilities in battle over here and turn the tide in our favor. Off in the distance on the far, well, what used to be the right flank, you'll notice we're just about to take care of the enemy unit that's there. There we go. They've been taken care of. So now it's just a massive mosh pit to come as we slowly chip away at the Myrmidon swordsmen. Again, the reason why I wanted to really showcase this take on the battle is because I felt like it highlighted the importance of that flanking move from the archers and just how much of a difference shields can make. Myrmidon swordsmen, these are the same units that we, took apart within seconds at the beginning of this battle with all that ranged fire into their backs. But here you're going to see how long they can last. They're still fighting. They're unbreakable, of course, so they're not going to just give up on the fight. And you can see how much of a difference the archers made on the right flank versus the lack of archers on the left flank. So I just thought that was particularly interesting. I thought that really stood out to me. 65% block chances are pretty high. Some units get them as high as 85%, so it's interesting to see how flanking goes beyond just melee. It really involves some of the ranged units as well. And as I ramble along, you can see we've barely taken 50% of this unit's health off, whereas the archers in this time had already completely dropped their health down to about 80% or so. Nonetheless, as we charge in from all sides and continue to use Hector's various abilities to try and keep him, in the fight as effectively as possible and try to win this fight, I think it's fair to say we can wrap up over here with this battle at least, because really, there's not much else to see. We win the battle. It's just a matter of time. We chip away at this unbreakable unit, but we do overall decently, I would say, in the battle. And just a matter of eliminating this unbreakable unit. So let's move on to the next battle, which was far more challenging and also showcases some really interesting elements, some really interesting new factors in Total War Saga Troy. This battle was a serious challenge, and that's what made it all the more fun to play. I think I played it countless times. I think I only won it twice, and of the two victories, this victory, I feel, really showcases the importance of various unit traits, especially the weight being put on flanking, and just how much of a difference that makes on the battlefield. I wanted to make sure the victory was a decent one. I wanted to have units surviving in the end. I didn't want to just scrape by, so it was a very tense fight. I fought it so many times, really had to learn the mechanics and systems, and I thought that was it was a lot of fun, and I hope I can communicate all the decisions as clearly as possible. I will try to highlight all the traits and abilities that come into use and when and how and why I'm making certain decisions. For one, you can see I'm deploying pretty far back. Achilles needs to be kept safe from Hector as well, as I described earlier. Hector is able to absolutely pummel Achilles. I need to make sure that doesn't happen. At the same time, I've got these Thessalian units, a pair of them, that are able to stalk, and they are particularly efficient flankers. And then I've got these javelin throwers that are very light, very quick on their feet, able to hide in the tall grass, and I want to use them as flanking ranged units. A lot of the units we're up against on the other side of the field have really high shield block chances, which means if I fire into their fronts, we're not going to do much damage. It goes up to 85% in some cases, hence the flanking ranged units that if you watch the previous battle, you'll be familiar with the idea there already. Chariots and cavalry off to the far flank over there because I want to try and eliminate enemy ranged units as quickly as possible. And then we have a couple more spears that I'm forming up at the back over here. Should the Minotaur punch through, I want to be able to surround it and poke it to death. Now you'll notice me very quickly go through some of the attributes over here, like the immunity to flanking and the improved flanking capabilities. That makes me push those Myrmidon swordsmen off to the further flank so they can come in from the sides and rears if the opportunity presents itself. Apart from that, just a quick pan around, just showcasing how all of my light units are hiding in the tall grass. I'm not too concerned about them being so far from the main engagement, the central engagement, because they're so light, they move so quickly, they're actually able to act sort of like pseudo-cavalry coming in with rear charges. That's the hope. And then, of course, on the flank over here, we have units that are particularly efficient flankers, so when they come in from the sides or the rears, they will cause extra morale damage, and we can maybe break the enemy that much faster. Achilles back over here again, trying to play him a bit more defensively against Hector, though we will be sending him into melee. Obviously, he's a capable fighter, and he's got some pretty good rage abilities. Again, rage is accumulated in various ways with Achilles. He gains rage simply by being on the battlefield, and he also has an ability that you can trigger at a 0 cost of rage that just accelerates his rage gain, basically. So just hovering over his abilities, getting myself super familiar. You can almost tell I'm a lot more hesitant about this battle because of how much it was just kicking me around. I loved it for it. Now, off to the side, we're going to take a quick look at these Thessalians again. They both have stock, and they both have improved flanking attacks, so hoping to pull them in when the front lines engage, get some rear charges with them, and really break the enemy. Whereas here you can see our Phthian spears, have alternate attack modes, which we will be using to try and take down the Minotaur a bit more effectively as well. So again, doing a quick scan across my units, making sure I have everyone exactly where I need them to be. Getting ready to dive on into the action. So as we kick things off, just a note, the Trojan army we are fighting against is actually stronger than the one we were using in our version of this battle when we were playing the Trojans. So keep that in mind. It's not the same army. It's a lot more heavily stacked against us. They have better archers, for example. They have better... more Hector's Chosen, for example. So just something to keep in mind. Now, pushing in with this flanking attack to kick things off, I want to get my chariots and my cavalry into the rear lines of the enemy as quickly as possible. You can see a little bit of knockback action happening over here. But really what I want to do is I want to try and force their archers away from my front lines. My block chances on average are about 65%, so concentrated ranged fire is going to be a lot of trouble for us. That's why my cavalry is getting a little adventurous back over here, pushing in with some charges from this hilltop to try and shut down some of the enemy ranged units. Of course, we have to get through their regular units as well to get to those ranged units, but doing a decent job of at least distracting their archers, forcing them to fire back over here rather than on the front line, because you'll see some of the archers have joined the rest of the front line melee units and pushed up front, and they're getting ready to fire upon our own front line over here. So as they start to let loose, you'll see that our shields will immediately obviously go up, providing us with some defensive capabilities, but it's only 65% compared to the 85%, for example, that it can go up to. But still, it's helping us. You can see we are taking some damage. I'm definitely glad that our chariots have and cavalry has kind of pulled around. Meanwhile, you can see eyeing potential targets for my javelins over there. Hector's Chosen would make a great target, I would think. But at the same time, we have frontline engagements kicking off, so got to get some counter charges going in. Want to make sure we take advantage of charge bonuses as we also finally loop around and start to fire away at Hector's Chosen, or at least move to fire away at Hector's Chosen. We also get ready to pull some flanking maneuvers if necessary to charge into the frontline engagements from the sides, and you can see those champions of Troy about to push in against my javelineers, so I need to try and intercept them, as at the back, my cavalry has done a pretty good job in shutting down enemy archers. On the left flank, our spears have been spotted, but right now at the right flank, there's a lot of tension as I need to pull these javelins back. They've been firing away at Hector's Chosen quite effectively, doing a lot of damage, but now we have these Trojan soldiers getting horrendously close. Thankfully, though, we are a light unit over here, so our Javelineers are able to very quickly turn around and run. Unfortunately, some of them do get struck down, but the interception happens at the back as well. We're able to stop in the tall grass, turn around, and resume firing now into the backs of a unit that is otherwise very heavily defended. I'm pretty sure they have 85% block chances, but of course, we're firing into their backs, so take a look at how they start to fall. And keep an eye on their health bar as well as we zoom out, because we will do a lot of damage to a very threatening unit. You can see, meanwhile, at the back, our cavalry and chariots continue to cause some trouble, while our Thessalian units are now completing their flanking maneuver, hoping to get those rear charges in again. Efficient flankers, they'll do so much work. And take a look at that right side, as our light units hiding in the tall grass are able to pop that ambush, move in and intercept that unit that was trying to pull a flank off of its own, and now our Javelineers can focus on some other targets as we've done quite a good job on that far right flank. You can see, again, Achilles trying to pull away from Hector, and meanwhile, the Minotaur over here, we're trying to focus down on him because he is extremely scary. You can see our spear-using Myrmidons over here are using their alternative attack mode. That's why their shields are on their backs, and their spears are being used with two hands. Gives them extra melee attack stats. I'm hoping to use that to my advantage to take that Minotaur down sooner rather than later, but of course he's got splash damage. He's a very hefty target, so he will still be tough to take out, but we do a decent job, I think, using that alternate attack mode. Our center is starting to break, but at the same time our rear charges are coming through with the spears that we had tucked off in the side. Worked out pretty well for us, I think. And meanwhile, you can see, again, these Javelineers looking for an opportunity to dive into one of the, well, not dive into, but throw javelins into a potentially threatening target, trying to get them into an ideal spot, while our cavalry and chariots get some charges in of their own. Again, they're not so hefty. They don't feel all that hefty, and the chariot that we have is weaker than the chariot that Achilles has when we are playing as the Trojans, so keep that in mind as well. And again, playing some keep away with Achilles as we fire into the backs of the Hector's Chosen over here. Again, a very threatening unit, so I want to focus on them, and collateral damage will deal damage to other units in the area. Holding back some of our rallying troops, while back over here you can see on the right side, sending in some units for some flanking attacks. These are super light units, so they're very nimble, they can move very quickly from place to place. So they're not, you know, efficient flankers in a technical sense, but because they're so light and so fast, they kind of act like pseudo-cavalry. They're able to get from point A to point B very, very quickly. Now you can see quite a few of my troops are giving up on the fight, but we've done a decent job of causing morale damage to the enemy as well. A lot of their soldiers have scattered, and as we come in with some charges over here as well, we're going to hopefully cause a fair bit of morale damage on some of these units too, because if we can get these guys to break, and you can see a decent bit of breaking is happening on that right side, if we can get these guys to break, the day is ours. Now, here come the light infantry units pushing in for some rear charges as well, in the hopes of causing that extra morale damage. Again, they're not efficient flankers, but they're super light, they're super fast, they can, you know, go from point A to point B super quickly and get work done across the board. I really like using them as if they were cavalry. So I'm particularly a fan of that unit. Now you can see over here the javelins, most of them are out of ammunition. One unit still has some ammo, so gonna get some volleys in there, but the rest of my Javelineers are going to be used for rear charging, and again, just causing that little bit of morale damage where possible, as Achilles over here dives on in, tries to get some strikes through, because we want to try and cause that little bit of damage that might just tip these guys into giving up on the fight, and you can see that's exactly how it works, but we do have to stay wary because Hector is right there. We want to keep our distance, so we leave him alone and dive into a different engagement, while our spears dive into the battle on the right side, and the Javelineers also get thrown into a melee situation, because why not? We can get some extra damage out of them. And you can see Hector trying to use whatever he can to try and keep his units alive for as long as possible, and that's something that's been an extreme point of frustration with this battle, because he tends to do that and keep his unbreakable units alive for an excessively long time. But take a look at this. We find the gap over here and bring these, again, extremely light units through that gap to provide some flanking support over here, where there are some units that are not immune to flanking. So we want to try and get some rear charges over there and break those Trojan defenders, while down here these champions of Troy, they are immune to flanking, but we can still get a little bit of extra damage in there. So just threading the needle over there, getting some rear charges where they would, you know, be at least somewhat more efficient than on that far right flank, where the bulk of the troops are actually immune to flanking from the enemy. But this is working out pretty well in our favor. We contemplate using Arestia again. That is the, you know, I think it's 60 seconds of buffs that you can get that'll help you overcome potential threats. It's a reference to Greek epic poetries. But here, these spear fighters trying to resume battle. We just go in for the interception over here, trying to hold them in place. Want to make sure they're not able to get a rear charge in of their own. So in comes the interception. I really quite like how interceptions look in this game and how melee can often be very intermingled. This is not the perfect example of that. I kind of wish it was, but there are some really nice intermingling situations you get. But take a look at that. In comes the flank. Instant shatter, and that right flank has been completely massacred. They've all given up on the fight. Some units are returning to the fray, but I'm not too concerned since they're pretty badly hurt. And here you can see using one of our rage abilities to terrify those champions of Troy. The morale damage from that ability is quite helpful, and you can see that unit has immediately started to run away. These Trojan defenders are going to suffer a rear charge as well, just setting up for that. Again, the value of rear charging, whether efficient flanking is there or not, the value of flanking has been, it feels like it's significantly more important. Perhaps it's some sort of placebo effect because of how challenging this battle felt otherwise, but it did make some very big differences. So you can see I'm trying to push in with some rear charges over there to try and eliminate those returning soldiers. And Hector, meanwhile, over here still fighting, but we're trying to keep him away from Achilles for as long as possible, because should Achilles die at this point, things could still go horribly wrong. The balance of power is finally in our favor. It has been a long fight. So much movement, so much tension, so much stress, but really all the flanking, shutting that Minotaur down nice and early by using our alternate method, our alternate attack mode, I think made a huge difference. And over here as well, you can see going into these Trojan defenders to try and get them to break, because we've got improved flanking attacks. So just again, just applying that pressure, trying to get these guys to fall apart as quickly as possible. And there it is, more routes, not just routes, but shatters. And that means it is Hector against the world over here, trying to fully surround him. If he wants to keep fighting, then we'll happily oblige, because we can absolutely kill him at this point. But he is likely to give up on the fight as well. It's not like he's unbreakable. He will potentially give up on the fight. And you can see Achilles still at about 3/4 health, so feeling pretty comfortable about diving in against Hector now if necessary as well. And I do think we end up doing that in just a moment's time. But Achilles over here right now, just cleaning up some of these soldiers who remain on the battlefield. Done quite well, I would say, and I think it's about time we dive on into Hector. You can see his health is extremely low. He's been fully surrounded by our javelins and everything, and ultimately he decides to surrender. Coward. Now, this battle, as we chase Hector down, because honestly, I was so... this battle was such a struggle to win, and to win well, that I wanted to kill Hector. Honestly, I wanted to chase him down. So as we do that, I just want to mention, it was so much fun. It was so much fun because I had to actively use all of those flanking traits and pay attention to our maneuvers and our movements and who is immune to flanking and who will actually suffer from it. I had a great time, and I really think it showcases some of those new traits like light units versus medium and heavy units, you know, who moves quickly, who moves slowly, who's able to flank, who isn't. What a fight this was. And a nice little touch right at the end over here after we kill Hector, you'll see Pyrrhic victories are now called Cadmean victories, a reference to Cadmus, who existed before Pyrrhus existed. A Pyrrhic victory can't be a thing right now because King Pyrrhus hasn't done his Pyrrhic victory yet. So instead we get a Cadmean victory, which is a reference to a man who lost all of his companions in a battle that is actually a mythical battle. But all that's irrelevant because now we're moving on to my impressions, and yes, I will touch on the recent news of the Epic exclusive launch, and the game being available for free for 24 hours after it launches, but let's leave that for last. As always, we'll start with the positives, and please keep in mind that lacking the context of campaign, it's really hard to tell how the factions actually stack up against each other, or how difficulty actually plays. And this being a pre-release build, you can expect some visual or mechanical issues, and changes to unit stats and the like. So, we got to spend quite a bit of time with the build, which was really quite nice, and it gave me a chance to get familiar with all the different mechanics at play, and I gotta say, playing the Achilles battle on hard was a serious challenge. The difference between easy and hard wasn't just numerical, but the AI had better troops, and you had worse troops. It took several tries to win without being super cheesy, but it was a great way to show us that the use of all the new features made a huge difference when the odds weren't in our favor. It was clear to me that the infantry focus worked a lot better than I was expecting, and the different units definitely felt substantially different as well, with armor and all making them look different too. But, of course, humans look like humans. It's not going to look as different as the difference between a man and a man on a horse, or a man and, I don't know, an eagle. The impact to gameplay was noticeable, though, and that was what's most important here. It felt more or less immediately evident which infantry unit was supposed to be the parallel to light cavalry, which infantry unit was supposed to hold the front line, which was supposed to stick close but come in from the flanks as the hammer, if you will, and which was supposed to harass from range. The speed differences and the way terrain affects the speed differences between light, medium, and heavy troops made the troops feel a little different as well, with the sluggish heavy infantry easily outmaneuvered and peppered to death by the light javeliniers, but even more so when the infantry were traversing through mud, for example. So clear how much slower the heavy infantry moves and how much more easily the lighter units are able to navigate around them and use the terrain for escape or ambush. The added attributes of units being anti-axe or anti-sword on top of anti-large or armor-piercing was a nice touch as well, furthering the divide between and amplifying the need for specific troops in specific scenarios, and the extension to flanking, I have to say, might be one of my favorite things. Unfortunately, the battles we got to play did include a fair number of units that were immune to flanking, but that did help showcase the difference between one of those units and one that is susceptible to flanking, or one that only slightly reduces its effects. Not only that, the difference in using a unit that was simply fast versus one that was an effective flanker, mechanically speaking, was huge. And beyond that, the really high shield block chances had me using ranged units to flank after lines engaged in a way that I haven't done in a long time, because honestly, I've not felt the need to. Here in these battles, I definitely felt the need, or at least the value. And again, though we don't have the campaign gameplay yet for context, it feels like the Phthians of Achilles are a lot more aggressive than the heavily shielded and more defensive Trojans led by Hector. All this set aside one of my two biggest concerns with Troy. I was really worried about a lack of diversity and a lack of variety, but the devs have done very well to make the infantry feel like distinct classes beyond sword, spear, axe. A concern I do have about all this, though, is how well it will be reflected in campaign. The preset armies could be amplifying tactics and traits that don't actually need to be used when playing a serious campaign, because you'll always recruit the right troops for the given situation, thus nullifying the need for extraneous tactical play. I really hope the campaign-level asymmetry allows for these new tactics, traits, and attributes to actually matter, but hey, only time will tell. My biggest issue with the game so far is the mixed messaging when it comes to history versus fantasy, and I'm getting the very distinct feeling of wanting to have as well as eat one's cake. If we're supposed to be seeing the truth behind the myth, which I know many people don't like, but I'm personally genuinely intrigued by the idea, but if we're supposed to see the truth behind the myth, how do we explain Hector's zombie healing ability where he can replenish hit points in a radius? In all honesty, the heavy reliance on these abilities in general just bothers me on many levels, and it's a core issue I have with Three Kingdoms Romance Mode as well. I've never played Romance Mode for this very reason, but with Troy, I won't have a choice. I'm begrudgingly accepting of the single entity commander unit, and the way duels work here as opposed to Three Kingdoms is certainly my preference, where heroes don't get locked in unless a specific ability is used, but I guess I'm just not a fan of this recent obsession with fantasy, and to anybody who rightfully says, well, it's based on an epic, so obviously it's going to be like this, I guess my point is this: either go full fantasy or go full historical interpretation. If we have magic healing, then why not have actual minotaurs as well? On which note, I'm personally actually quite okay with how the Centaur and Minotaur are implemented, and things like the Savage Roar ability is perfectly fine by me. It's similar to a war cry which, think about it, in the real world, if you're in the middle of a battle and you hear a particularly horrifying war cry, you're gonna end up a little shook. And it's a lot more believable to me than zombie healing or long-distance morale damage delivery. And honestly, the zombie healing thing, that's such an easily fixed issue, at least in my opinion. Imagine if healing only worked in a radius around Hector, and it also froze the units in place while active and reduced melee stats. I'd believe it being a quick bit of first aid being applied on the field as opposed to this strange godlike regeneration, and that also introduces a new level of tactical play on the battlefield, having to pull frontline troops back alongside your hero, Hector, holding them in a place which is not ideal for combat, healing them up, and then sending them back in. It really changes the dynamic on the battlefield, whereas here we just have magic. Anyway, enough of me harping on this. Apart from this, there were a couple of minor issues that I think were just a matter of the game being in development still. Cavalry charges lacked weight, animations often didn't line up, the visuals really weren't on par with Three Kingdoms or Warhammer 2, and the UI felt a little clunky. I'm actually quite disappointed that the unit cards and UI in general don't embrace the black figure pottery style. Thrones of Britannia unit cards were art. They took a risk, many people didn't like them, but they were really quite bold. And here, though, we have something that just feels a little plain by comparison. I think overall, I'd say I'm compelled by the way they're making infantry-focused combat work, with the new terrain types, unit weights, and the extra impact of flanking being some very, very interesting aspects that I definitely want to see in future Total War games. However, there's a very big elephant in the room. The Epic exclusivity deal. While I have the same usual issue of not liking exclusivity deals and thinking they're a terrible way to introduce competition, I don't want to talk about that, as I have a very different red flag being flown over here, and I hate to say it. Is this a signal that Troy is going to be dead on arrival? Launching on EGS, it's already a spin-off title, the last of which saw a lukewarm response at best, and on top of that, it doesn't really appeal to historical-only fans at all, who don't have a game coming for them for probably a couple of years still. That doesn't really sound like the angle is about growing the player base as much as it's just about ensuring a profit off of Troy. Is there a concern that the game wouldn't do well? If so, why? Honestly, after my time with the game, without having played the campaign, I was a little concerned, but I was hopeful. And after hearing this latest news, I'm a lot less hopeful. I worry that the game will just not live up to expectations, and that's why the deal makes the most sense. This is all speculation though, of course, and I don't want to think too much on it. We'll learn more as time comes along. I don't want to pass judgment until I've had a chance to play campaign mode, and I'll obviously let you all know what I think about that. Ignoring this whole exclusivity deal, though keeping that in the back of our mind, I suppose, to a degree. Honestly, I'm annoyed at the move for all the usual reasons too, but it was only a matter of time, really. Now, apart from that, it's early to make a call on Troy, obviously. There are a lot of interesting aspects, and between heroes, agents, mythical units, full siege battles, and other features you can learn more about in my other video linked in the description and pinned comment down below, there are things to be excited about and things to be worried about too, depending on your preferences. My desire to see and play a new historical game, and I mean a proper historical title, is definitely a big factor in my personal opinion, but that aside, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on that, like I already said, I'd love to see more of going forward. Now, what are your thoughts on what you've seen today? Are any of your concerns quelled, or are you more worried now than you were before? Do you have any questions or feelings you'd like to share? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll answer what I can. And despite the move to Epic Game Store, I'll likely look to cover the game as usual, at least up to and shortly after launch, like I did with Thrones of Britannia, so make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Troy content to make your ultimate buying decision when the time comes. And, of course, if you're interested in strategy gaming content in general, that's what we do around these parts. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of my channel members and patrons for supporting the channel on a monthly basis. You keep us alive and running smoothly. And a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.